Hello and welcome back to Big Bandit Gaming. Today, it's just the two of us. I'm your host, Troy, and I have Colton with me. Hey, Colton.
Hello, I'm ready for some one-on-one time with you, Troy. Let's do it.
As it turns out, Colton was ready about like an hour ago, but I forgot time zones existed. So I was definitely late to record this podcast. So
What a shocker. Mr. Arizona forgot about time zones.
Yeah, because we don't have any here. It's like one of the... I think it might be the only place in the U.S. where that does not affect us. We don't do daylight savings here.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, which is great. Like, it's great that we don't ever have to worry about it, but I still have to know, like, oh, okay, are we on, like, when stuff is announced for Pacific time, does that mean that's the exact time for me or an hour later? Like, it still gets in the way of things, but it's fine. We're here. I'm just glad it was just me and you today, so I didn't have to, like, reschedule everybody or anything crazy like that. So, well, today, it is June the 13th, so technically we are right in the middle of E3, but since E3 is still happening, I didn't want to do an episode on it just in case stuff was still getting announced. And it's a bummer too, because I just found out that there's rumors that Nintendo's going to do something at the end of the month. Because they didn't announce anything, so we might have waited till the end of the month just to still have stuff come up. But I think there's been plenty that'll give us plenty to talk about, so we'll be good. But that is not why we're here today. So for about the last it depends when we start playing, but for the last month, we've been talking about Enslaved Odyssey to the West, and I wanted to do I'm not sure how often we'll do this, because I know it's hard for people to put games they weren't already planning on playing in their schedule, but I was thinking of calling it BBG Plays, and that's when we go back to a game, probably an older game, because that's a little more interesting. A game that most of us haven't played, and just, revisit it, play it, talk about it. So that's what we did today. And our first game in that series will be Enslaved Odyssey to the West. Before I go into kind of the history of the game, Colton, before I brought it up, have you ever heard of this game?
I have heard of it. I remember seeing it on store shelves, like in GameStop. But due to my limited fund back then, being a teenager, relying on my parents' money, it was not a game that I ever wanted to, like, risk my own money on. I stayed a little bit true with the Call of Duties and all that stuff. So I always saw it, but I just never took a chance on it.
Yeah, the big ones. I did play it back in the day, but I didn't play it like day one. I don't even think I was as tuned in. I think what clued me in on it is, okay, so on the PS3, there used to be a digital magazine called Core. I think it's just pronounced Core. I don't know, but it's a Qore, I believe. And it was a digital magazine just for the PS3, like PSN. And it'd take, that you could download. I think it was monthly. And it would give you trailers, and it was like hosted. It's kind of like one of those promo shows that, like, you walk into a GameStop and still see, but it was just for PlayStation. So it's a weird thing. I think they're like literal menus, like intro videos, and you can like click trailers off like menus with your controller. It's kind of cool. It was a cool idea. But that's where I first saw it, and I'd say what really struck me was how colorful it was, because it was a pretty big running joke that entire generation that everything was just gray.
Yeah, everything was gray and brown, and
and a lot of them looked the same, because most things were like all running on Unreal Engine 3, and they were all just like look like the color scheme of Gears of War. So this really popped out as just like, whoa, that's a lot of color, and character design looks really neat. And I think we're going to run into that a lot, is that we're going to take this game with kind of 2022 in mind. But so when we talk about this game, we're not, it's hard to talk about it in a bubble because you have to know when it came out, because that's kind of that's probably where a lot of our negatives will come from. It's just, it just goes to show you games have come a long way after a decade, even,
They have.
Yeah. So before we jump in on the game itself, I'm just going to give us listeners just a little quick background of the game. So this game was developed by Ninja Theory, whose previous work at this point would have been the PS3 launch game Heavenly Sword. That I don't think did well enough to do a sequel, so they moved on to Enslaved, and Bandai Namco partnered to publish this one. It was announced in October 2009 in Game Informer. So honestly, I was surprised to hear that, because the game comes out in like the next year. So pretty short like announcement to release time,
Yeah.
In my head, I felt like that was kind of a more recent thing. Like Bethesda had started doing that, where they just like announce a game and be like less than a year later.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that's not like the craziest instant, I think, what was it, like Fallout 4 was like 3 or 4 months.
It was 5 months, if I believe so, if I remember.
Yeah, which is cool. I like when that happens, even though Fallout 4 was like leaked for years.
Yeah,
you
was.
like knew the setting and the story. It's just like, yeah, okay. So notable staff that worked on this game. I'm gonna butcher this name, but the director of Enslaved was Tamim Antonides in Antoine Day. Sorry, that is not the pronunciation, but he is the director of this game, Tamim, and he is a founder of Ninja Theory. To this day, he's actually directed every game since. So DMC, like everything up to the Hellblade, the sequel to Hellblade. It looks like it's going to be like maybe their first, what I would call completely AAA title,
Oh, that's cool.
But he's still directing, which is kind of wild. I wasn't expecting that. The big claim to fame when this game was being developed and like marketed was this was still coming off like Lord of the Rings, was still really big at this point. But Andy Serkis, Golem, he did the motion capture. He was the motion capture director and the main actor. So he had a big role
when I figured that out after I started playing, that blew my mind. But it was after playing the first couple hours when I found that out. That was very believable.
Wow, that's crazy.
I mean, because I feel like at the time, I feel like motion capture was not as good as it was in this game here. I remember playing games back then, and I was like, wow, the characters, like, it's very believable, and like like whenever their faces move when they say something, like it felt ahead of its time. And then when I found that out, I felt like it made sense to me.
When did you find that out? I'm actually I shouldn't be surprised, because like you said, you kind of just saw this game on shelves and that was kind of that. But did you kind of like look it up, or did I say something?
No, yeah, I think I looked it up. I just like looked up the Wikipedia page for it. I think maybe the day after I played a couple hours of it for the first time. Or maybe it was after I logged off, and after playing it for like the first 3 hours, I logged off and just kind of looked up the Wikipedia, and I was like, Andy Serkis. I was like, oh my God, isn't that the... it took me a minute to remember who that was, just because I'm kind of bad with names sometimes. But then I had to look up Andy Serkis, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. He was in charge of motion capture. That's cool.
Totally. And this is probably more near King Kong than even Lord of the Rings at this point, but that was like prime Andy Serkis. If you were doing any kind of motion capture and like, in film, that guy's name was on it. Another pretty notable they actually hired Alex Garland to co-write. And he, at that point, I think 28 Days Later, that kind of horror zombie movie, which is really good. That
Okay.
he had wrote that, and since this game, he's actually became one of my like favorite directors. So he's done Deus Machina, uh, Annihilation. So just like some really pretty seminal like recent sci-fi pieces. So he really helped with like character dialogue, and the writing and stuff, which is cool. That was something I had no idea of till I went to it. I was like, oh, that's wild. And then another name I should I should have looked at pronunciation. I'm gonna mispronounce that. So his name is Nitin Asani. He is the composer, and I don't think we'll mention the music quite after this. It was one of my complaints about the game is I don't know if there was like a single piece of very memorable music.
No, I don't think so either.
And that's surprising to me for some reason. I just think whenever you have like a big fantasy game like this, usually the soundtrack is like very forward, you know?
Mhm.
And I looked up his not his IMDb, but like his Wikipedia, and I think this was the last game he worked on. He was just like a TV composer. But yeah, he composed this game, but like I said, it was like very in the background. Like there's not a lot of there's like very generic battle music, but when you're exploring, there's not much behind that. But the game did release October 5th, 2010. And at the time, I'm looking at Metacritic scores here. It scored about an 80 out of 100 on PS3, an 82 out of 100 on 360, and the 70 out of 100 on PC. And so, what did you end up playing the game on? What version?
PC. Play on Steam.
PC. Cool,
Mhm.
cool. And did that run all right for you?
There were a couple times where I'd have to load my last checkpoint because I was stuck in the ground, or
Interesting.
stuck in the air too. That happened once, and there was nothing for me to do other than just reload last checkpoint. So that happened. That definitely happened more than I would have wanted it to.
Okay.
A little glitchy for me, but I mean, I was able to finish the
Yeah.
game. So
Yeah, that's funny. I was reading some PC reviews, and that's what they're saying. And you were using actually like an era appropriate graphics card too. It came out after the one you're using is after the game, but yeah, I played it on PC as well. And I might have just been able to, I didn't run into the biggest glitch I ran into is at one point it just like stuttered like crazy. Like I had to restart the
really?
entire game because every motion like in cutscenes is just like a big stutter fest. So I was like, what is going on?
Jeez.
But besides that, okay, no, you're right. At one point during the sequence where you're stealing the big like mech at the end, I like
Mhm.
floated in the air and I could not move, and I had to restart.
Yeah, that sounds
And
like what
when I
happened to me.
restarted, the checkpoint was like super far away. I was like, oh, well, that sucks.
Yeah, something in that same fight, something happened. It glitched out on me, and I had to restart. I had to restart that entire fight, and I was at the end of it whenever that glitch happened.
Oh, that's brutal.
Oh, and you know what? There was actually one glitch that was almost game breaking. It was maybe a third of the way in. I think it's the first time you run into the mech with the I don't know, the wrecking balls on his hands.
Yeah.
He's supposed to blast through a wall, and then you fight him, and then you kill him, and then you're supposed to walk through that wall he burst through. Well, whenever I dropped down in the arena, a cutscene happened, and it went to the wall, and all this sound happened, like an explosion and rocks flying everywhere, and Trip was like, "Oh my God, Monkey, look out!" But the wall did not move. And then it would take me back into the fight, but the robot is still on the other side of the wall, and it's like throwing his hands through the wall at me, but I could not walk through the wall.
That's
And
funny.
I reloaded the checkpoint 3 times, and that happened all 3 times. I was able to, what I did, I went to the wall, I did my strong attack and my staff. I guess the staff hitbox passed just through the wall to hit him. And what it did, it kind of, I don't really know how it happened, but it kind of brought him through the wall, but the wall was still intact. So then I was able to fight him, kill him, and then Trip jumps back down, and then she's like, "All right, let's go through here." And she just walked right through the wall, and I tried to follow her, but it was still solid for me. So
Weird.
I had to like walk up and down the wall until I found like a little like part of the wall that I could walk through in. But it was almost game breaking. Like as many times as I
Wow,
kept
that's
retrying it.
crazy.
Yeah, that was actually I forgot about that until just now, but that was the worst glitch I had. But luckily I was able to get through it just by pure luck.
Yeah, those scripting error ones are the worst. I back in the day I was played that Tomb Raider reboot on PS3 and I couldn't beat the game because this door that was supposed to like explode outward, like you'd hear a bunch of battle music and nothing would happen. And I like ran in circles. This was like 2 days after the game came out. I almost got to the end and I had to wait like
Oh
2 months for them to patch the PS3 version. I reloaded it. I played for 15 more minutes and beat the game.
Oh my god.
Yep.
That's why I never beat BioShock 1.
Really?
Never beat it.
Wow.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I think if I remember correct, the last thing you're supposed to do is take an elevator ride up and then fight the last fight of the game and then beat it. And the elevator
Oh.
never worked for me, and it auto saved in the elevator.
Oh
So
no.
there was no way. There was no getting out of it. So I was so
Yeah.
mad. I was like, I'm not replaying this game. So I put it down, and I really want to pick it back up and finish it, and probably replay it at some point, but I just haven't yet.
Yeah, there's much better versions now. You'd run into that back in there. I did warn everybody before we started playing that the PS3 version was probably not the way to go because just the way the PS3 architecture worked is Unreal Engine 3 didn't run super well on it, which is a bummer because most third parties used Unreal Engine 3. So
Yeah,
I said I'd go with Xbox or PC, but
I'm surprised about the PS3 Metacritic being higher than the PC though, because of that.
yeah, I feel like that era, most games ran like under 30 frames per second, like kind of 20 to 30, and we were just kind of used to it. But I think PS4, we got used to at least a stable 30.
Yeah.
Like most games could keep a stable frame rate, and even some, once the Pro were coming out, was coming out like 60, I think just as time went on and on, people just are a little more keen to like performance stuff, even if they're not super into it. You notice, so you kind of just accepted that back in the day. But yeah, I'm glad I didn't run anything like that. Like I could just remember that one glitch right to restart, but that's crazy. I'm glad it didn't just like break on you because I would have been like, well, I'm not going to make you play the whole game again.
Well, I probably would have because it was only like, it may have been 3 hours in maybe at that point. So it wouldn't have been that bad if I had to replay it.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, yeah. So the game had kind of, it had pretty good reviews. 80 is not a bad score. So most reviewers seem to enjoy it. Yeah, but the sales didn't quite reflect that. It sold after a year in 2011, it sold about 730,000 copies, which was deemed not successful enough to move forward with the planned sequel. So to me, 730,000 seems like a lot for maybe a game. It's hard to say because I wasn't as tuned in at this time. So I don't know what the talk was about this game or the hype or I just know it wasn't hyped enough in general to get on my radar. I just saw a trailer and was like, wow, that looks really cool, So it's hard to say what they were expecting, but yeah, 730,000. And again, in my head, this doesn't seem like a triple A game. It almost seems like between like a B game and a triple A game. You know what I mean? Kind of a double A game, let's say.
Double A, yeah.
Yeah, because you can see the corners cut in some areas where it's like, oh, it seems like this game might have had a little more money, might have been a little more polished in areas, but we can get into that. So that's kind of its development. So yes, the game is Enslaved Odyssey to the West, and it's loosely based on Odyssey to the West is like a Chinese novel, which a lot of properties are based around. Like Dragon Ball is based on it. Goku has a tail. He has a cloud. In the game, Monkey. If you notice the character design, that little sash he has, it's not a tail, but it kind of looks like one.
Yeah.
That's just kind of their wink and nod. And he has like a little. He calls it a cloud, but it's like a disc that can float like a hoverboard, and they call it a cloud in the game. So, and Trip,
And he's got the hair.
Yeah, the hair. A Trip. Man, I'm trying to remember what the original name was. She says it right at the beginning, but they shortened it down to Trip. It's like Tripteka. I forget what exactly it was, but yeah. So it's loosely based on Journey to the West, which there's actually a really cool like Souls-like game being developed in China that looks amazing, and that's taking inspirations from it as well. I think it's called Wukong. Have you seen that?
Being developed right now?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I didn't know about that.
Oh man, it looks incredible, but that's for another time. There's just a lot of stuff that a lot of properties have taken from this, and this is one of them. So I don't think it plays into like the rest of the story. It's kind of its own thing, but it does take elements from it. So so this game came out like what 2010, like we said, and in my head, especially playing through the intro. So the intro, you're on a slave ship, right? And it shows just Trip and Monkey being captured. And the whole first sequence is kind of like an escape sequence on a floating slave ship. And I think it's a cool sequence. You know how in game development, sometimes they're like, you think of them developing everything in like a sequence, like, oh, they probably started with the first level and went to the second. And that's usually not the case. I feel like maybe this first section might have been one of the later sequences that they like did, because it's actually one of the more impressive ones.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, I mean, what were your like initial impressions playing through the intro before I give my take?
I liked the intro. I was still at the time I was still a little unsure of like what kind of game it was going to be, like how combat heavy or if it was going to be mainly stealth, because I went into this game, having basically no knowledge from back then and just watching the trailer one time before I started the game. So I really didn't understand. I didn't really know or what to expect. So I was really enjoying it, and I was still trying to piece together what kind of game I'm about to play. But I was pretty impressed with it, and I mean a little let down that I think the rest of the game wasn't as good as that section. I think it kind of got my hopes up a little bit too much.
It's a good first impression.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't help think about like just the timing of Uncharted 2's release. Because Uncharted 2 was like end of 2009. They were kind of more. I mean, they announced it in 2009, but they'd probably been developing it for a bit. And so in my head canon of development, it makes me think like, did they play Uncharted 2 and we're like, okay, we need one of these,
Yeah.
We need a big action sequence, at the beginning or the end, because that's what it kind of gives you. It gives you not just because, climbing is one of the main game mechanics, which is very Uncharted-esque, but just because it gives you a set piece moment that like Uncharted and games that, come in this wake all have done now, because back in 2010, that was still like a really new thing. I think Uncharted 2 really blew open the gates, and then like every game was doing it, from like Dead Space 2 to Tomb Raider to now even modern games like playing Guardians of the Galaxy, you're like, oh, this is a set piece moment. So yeah, it opening with that is just, you made you think like, oh man, there's going to be a lot more of these, in the same way Uncharted did.
And they had, I mean, like you said, they had to have played Uncharted and then put a little bit of that in this game, because I got Uncharted 2 vibes so much from the game.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and not just the climbing, like even before I climbed all over the place, just like I feel like how good the motion capture was, and like the big set pieces that they were trying to make. Like every like 45 minutes to an hour, there's like a big set piece that was happening, and I got Uncharted 2 vibes heavy from this game.
Yeah, for sure. And to its credit, I actually think that the like parkour climbing elements actually feel better than Uncharted
Oh yeah,
2
they
or
don't
3.
they do not waste your time at all. They let you get through it quickly.
Yeah, I think most modern games that have that mechanic actually control very much the same, where you're just gonna your character is just like an acrobatic genius, gets up a
Yeah.
wall real fast.
I mean, and
It's
they do
not,
call him Monkey, so I mean, it would make sense
it
for
makes,
it to feel
yeah.
better, you know.
Yeah, where it's like a little weirder sometimes when you play like a newer Assassin's Creed and the dude scales like like a beast, or like Shadow of Mordor or something. You're like, okay, yeah. Yeah, for his character it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, you're introduced, I think story-wise, you don't know much about the world. It's not like it gives you like a background, you know. But right away you I think this is the first time you meet like another human in the world, that like first slaver. Do you remember that
Oh yeah.
sequence where you meet him and he's like, I can't talk to you, I can't talk to you, and then
Yeah.
he has that crown, which later Monkey ends up wearing, but it just kind of fries his brain or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's funny because at that point in the story, you're like, oh, this is going to be like a big part, other humans being controlled,
Yeah,
stuff like that.
I really thought we'd run into more people than just two for the rest of the game. So,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I guess I should have said before, with my background for the game, I did play this game in 2011. And, at 2011, I just graduated high school. Like we said, there wasn't a lot of games like this that felt cinematic and like well written, and you could read like subtext just from like facial expression, like you were saying.
mhm.
This was still like a very new, very cool thing. So that's so in my head, this game was like on the level of like an Uncharted. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was interesting. I am coming from it from that context as someone who was a fan of this game coming back like what 11 years later. But yeah. So his brain gets fried. And then the rest of the sequence is just Monkey trying to get off the ship, and it's I think, does he do something to blow up the ship, or does Trip? I think Trip does something, right?
Yeah, I think something happens with one of the engines, and it ends up
Yeah.
tilting the ship like 90 degrees, and all of a sudden the wing is like straight up in the air.
Yeah, and there's
Um,
like, as far as set piece moments go, there's a really cool sequence where you're flying off the side of the ship. And to its credit, this was before Uncharted 3 did that set piece,
oh yeah,
you
that's
know?
true.
Because I was like, oh, they're just doing the Uncharted 3 thing, and I'm like, wait, that wouldn't have been out yet. So like I said, it's actually a really impressive, kind of cool section. Yeah, you're trying to get to like the escape pods, and you can see all of them are being ejected. And Trip, you're following Trip. So at some point, Trip gets in the last escape pod, and Monkey kind of attaches himself to it. And I think it just it shows him shooting off. Okay. Oh, so at one point, you see the plane hit like the tip of the Statue of Liberty.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
And that's like a very Planet of the Apes moment. You're like, oh, we're on
Yeah.
Earth. You know what I mean? That wasn't like a big reveal. That was like right at the beginning, without, just so they can tell you without telling you specifically. So yeah, at one point the plane hits the torch of the Statue of Liberty to give you a little wink, a little nod. But yeah, the last escape pod goes, and he wakes up on the ground with one of those headbands that the soldier was wearing that like fried his brain. And Trip is kind of like a techie, like one of those characters. She's a hacker. Trip's a hacker.
Yeah.
So she's very good with technology, and she hacks the visor to put it on Monkey and have it under her control. And at this point, she pretty much, she's pretty much telling him like, hey, you need to help me get back to my village. And if you don't, like, or if you try to hurt me, this thing will kill you, And so that
Great
kind of
first
like,
impression.
that's like kind of their dynamic to the beginning is just kind of like Monkey's just an unwilling participant. But that this is finally when you start to get a feel for like what the game is. So I think of the game like split into like 3 sections, and this first section is you like traveling in New York and stuff. And at first the game, I it's interesting. It seems like the game is split into like 3 gameplay types, and that's like stealth, combat, and like exploration. And instead of like having a good split of both throughout the game, it's really just like, here's the 3 things our character does, and they split the game to like really focus on one of those, which would be okay if the game did all 3 really well. you know? So, I mean, what did you think of this first section? Because I think it worked pretty well because it's just kind of Trip and Monkey starting to build trust with one another while trying to kind of survive these robots. Because that's what's happened is the world's been taken over by this corporation, and there's just a ton of these robots that just seem to want to kill them all around the place.
Yeah, I think I definitely liked the first third of the game the best. I think it was more interesting than the other 2/3 story wise, with them kind of learning about each other and talking throughout the whole game. And it was also more interesting gameplay wise, I think. Having to sneak, like having to find a way to sneak around the turrets and have her, trying to figure out when to tell her to send out a decoy so you could run to the next checkpoint or the next, barrier, and then trying to figure out when to tell her to run to the next barrier while you distract the robots. I think a lot of that was a lot more interesting than just the straight up combat that happens in the other 2/3 of the game.
For sure, yeah. And I do think that first third really does split the difference of the 3. Like there's good platforming, there's a good amount of stealth. There's not just endless waves of robots. And like you said, yeah, they give Trip is always with you, and she's controlled by an AI. And at first you think, oh, is this just going to be like an escort mission? But she's pretty capable. What I did notice right away was if Trip gets like captured by a robot, it's not like an instant fail. She has a way to like stun them, and that gives you another chance to run over to her and like fight them off. So it's not like an instant fail thing, which I appreciate because there's still games that do like instant fail stealth stuff, and that stuff drives me nuts.
Yeah, it sucks. Yeah, it was really nice that she had the little EMP things. Maybe I just played better than I thought I did, but I actually only had her use that twice in the whole game. She used it one time, and then towards the end of the game, she used it again, and I completely, for a second, I was like, "What did she just do?" And I was like, "Oh, I forgot that she did that one time in the beginning of the game. I forgot she could do that."
I think there's only 2 scripted events where she does it, so you might have been actually really careful. Because there's that part in the beginning where I think she's supposed to do it, and then there's a part when they're going. I think it's the Pigsy area. And she gets like trapped by mechs, and you're running to get her.
Oh, you're right. That was a scripted moment.
And I think that's a scripted, yeah. But it's interesting that she has a bunch of tools that she can use. Like you said, she can use a decoy EMP. But past this first section, you never like use it again. Yeah, there might be 1 or 2 instances. Weird. Yeah, because I thought that dynamic worked pretty well, and that maybe you'd be able to upgrade what she can do, or, it's just like they kind of made this whole gameplay loop, and then they kind of throw it away once you reach Trip's village. Yeah. So something interesting too. So when they a lot of stuff happens in like real time, like cutscenes. But they still have like cutscenes that are just like videos that play, and that happened a lot in that generation where cutscenes don't happen in real time. And so it was a little jarring for me because those are like way lower quality than like the high PC settings. So that is another technical thing I did notice, but that didn't cutscenes didn't start really happening in real time till like the PS4 generation. Like Uncharted 2 and 3 had like video cutscenes as well. So that's not a knock against it. I just thought that was interesting. But I do find Trip is very capable. But what I did find, I think it's just like the era it was in. Like they wrote, or I thought they wrote Trip pretty okay. But and her character, like I said, she can help you. Like she puts decoys, she has stuns, a bunch of stuff. But then there's like certain points of the game where you like she jumps 3 feet and it's just hanging off, and she's like, "Help me, Monk! Help me!" You know what I mean? Like they write her to be very capable, but then other instances she's just kind of like doing like a damsel in distress thing.
Yeah,
and so I thought that was a little
weird,
inconsistent.
Yeah.
Because for the most part, and that's the only thing I would say about Trip. I think for the most part, like I felt Monkey's character had a good arc, going from like the unwilling participant to there's a point at the end of the village, like 2/3 through the game, where she's like, I'm gonna release you. I guess it's after that, because she like doubles down at one point, and he's like, okay, I'm already willing to do. He didn't say it. That's why the motion capture is really good, is because at one point she offers, she's like, okay, I'm getting ahead in the story, but they end up making it to her village, and just to find out everyone's dead or has been enslaved by the slavers that first got them, right? And after she finds her father's dead, she's like, we're going to take the fight to them if pretty much die trying. And if you notice, he doesn't put up a fight. He just kind of goes, okay. And that's kind of a cool moment of them not having to like explicitly write something out. They're just able to use like the facial capture.
I remember that scene very well.
Yeah, that's a cool scene. And there's a scene right before the village too, where you can tell Monkey knows something's wrong with her, or she knows something's wrong when they first get to the village, but he doesn't want to say anything.
Yeah.
He kind of right away is just like, she's just playing off like, oh, weird, the guard's not there, and the guy who works the bridges isn't there, and he's like,
Yeah, she kept finding. It was just like, oh, there's usually someone here 24/7, and then there's no one there, and she's like, oh, well, over here there's always somebody over here 24/7. She was very much in denial.
Yeah, but we'll come back to that scene because I do want to say a few more things about it. But so over the point of New York, there's a lot of like they're working together to get through the city. I think there's a good moment right before the first boss where they find fish, like a fully functioning ecosystem of fish that has survived. Cool. And she kind of explains like, hey, this is kind of how our village works too, And you fight the first boss, which I'm not a big fan of the bosses of the game. They just kind of bullet spongy. Like once you figure out the pattern, you just kind of have to keep doing it. So that is we'll get back. Let's just talk about the combat for a second. I think the combat is probably the weakest part of the game. And
I think so too.
Yeah, and it's not just because the game is older. I think even at the time, I thought the same thing, that the combat was like a little shallow. And now even more. Now it's like really jarring,
Oh yeah, for sure. I haven't played a game with, I think, combat this shallow in a long time, and it kind of threw me off. Like every time I finished a fight, I was like, man, I really feel like there was more I should be able to. There's more I can do in this fight, but there wasn't. I was like, nope. I had the one attack button that I hit a bunch of times. That's pretty much all I could do.
You know what they tried to go for? What I thought of was Arkham Asylum. Because you have that one staff. Like whenever you're in a combat encounter, there's like you usually get like 3 or 4 mechs on you, right?
Yeah.
And they give you that staff swing that makes it so you can create distance. So there's a lot of like the crowd control combat kind of reminds me of Batman, but where Batman does something good is there's like a really good flow to handle groups of enemies. And I don't feel like that's the case. Like most enemies will have a shield and you have to charge up. But the minute you charge up your move, hit one of the mechs to bring down their shield so you can hit them, like 3 other dudes just are on you, you know?
Yeah.
And there's not like a great way to handle them. Till I think it's too late. Like near the end of the village, I had enough of that ammo from that staff, which just like one hits everything in the game.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
But that's like way too late. That's after like the most combat heavy part of the game. So yeah, I was surprised too. I remember there being a skill tree, and to some sense that kind of helps. But it's not like modern games where, modern games you would have been able to have a move that would have like, did an AoE attack that broke everyone's shield,
Mm-hmm.
Or so yeah, the combat is not the greatest, and I think they don't throw a ton at you in this first third, which is good. So it's just still the right amount. And they even give you opportunities to use stealth more than combat,
Yeah, it did.
So yeah, I found that kind of pretty jarring. Back in the day, I remember it not being the best, like God of War was still a thing, and action games, DMC, it wasn't like back then was the norm. There were still games that did combat very well. So I think that's kind of where also the game's budget and maybe time constraint comes in. Is it just didn't feel fleshed out like you were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's functional for what it is. And we'll get to the village sequence where it just, there are points in the game where it pushes that combat farther than it's supposed to go. But yeah, so you're going through, you're exploring, you defeat that last boss. And I think after that last boss, Trip and Monkey have the first moment where, I don't know, that they just have like a moment of agreement where she's not forcing him to do something. He's the one moving her along.
Yeah. Like he's actually interested in getting her there and
yeah.
helping her out, yeah.
Yeah, you can tell he's starting to kind of care for her. But yeah, I would say that first third of the game. Oh, and I put in my notes here that it being a game of this era, there are multiple turret sequences, which is something games of that era did. Like if there was a gun in a game, you would have a turret sequence.
Yep.
I think that goes back. I think that goes even back to like PS2. Like you can play like old Ratchet and Clank games and stuff. Like they love turret sequences and those in like the PS2, PS3 generation. So there's a good amount of that. I think there's a moment in the first one where you're running towards the camera with like that big dog chasing you.
Oh yeah. I remember
and that's just another Uncharted 2 moment. You're like, they must have played it, and we're like, wow, that'd be a really cool idea, But yeah, I mean, what did you think about the writing up to that point?
Up to that point, I mean, I enjoy the dialogue between the two characters, and the only thing I wish is I kind of wish they gave me a little bit more background on what happened. I mean, at the time I was like, oh, it'll probably be, better explained or, later in the game. And I feel like it kind of wasn't. They didn't really get into what happened, which is fine. They don't, just because it's post-apocalyptic game, I feel like they don't owe you, to tell you exactly what happened, how it got to this, which is fine. I just think that's personal and kind of what I wanted to know. But I thought the writing was really well. The writing was really good. The dialogue between them was really good. I only felt kind of weird about a certain other character that is introduced later on in the game. Yeah, but other than that, I really liked it.
Yeah. I thought the same thing. I thought because when I thought back to this game, you know how Uncharted 2 really did this a lot, and now every game does it almost too much. But like the characters never shut up. They are always talking. There's something I appreciate. There are times where like you're just platforming and they're just kind of doing their thing and they're not talking. So I almost, like you said, I almost want a little more of them to talk about kind of like their backgrounds, what they're doing. But there were times where I'm just like, you know what, this is kind of cool. Like, I feel like some games really feel the need to always fill every moment with dialogue, you know?
Yeah, like they didn't like. I felt like a lot of games they can't have that quiet moment. Like there has to be
Yeah.
something being said 24/7 or something.
Like Monkey didn't, every time he went to a sequence, he wasn't like, okay, gotta climb that pole. That was a close
Yeah.
one, you know? I didn't, that's what I found interesting is I didn't feel like that, like monologuing. I didn't feel like I was missing it. I was actually kind of like pleasantly like, oh, you know, that's it. This is actually really nice. But on the other end of the spectrum, like you said, I would have rather them, the inner character dialogue to been a little more fleshed out. And we're talking about in this game, there's one other character pretty much once you meet Trip and Monkey. And I think that would have been a good opportunity to give you more like background in the world. But they didn't take it, you know? So yeah, that would be my one complaint too, is just, I feel like they could have fleshed out the characters more within the dialogue and kind of the world. But overall, the dialogue that is there is actually pretty well done and well directed, you know?
Yeah, I thought so.
So yeah, you get through that first sequence. I think the first time you get your cloud, this is near the end of that first third of the game. I think the clouds are really fun, like mobility mechanic. And it's just a hoverboard pretty much that you can ride around the environment. And back in the day, I remember that sequence being really cool and really open. But now when I played it again, I'm like, oh, this is still just like a pretty small space.
Yeah, it's pretty small.
Yeah.
And really, any area that they give it to you later on in the game is a pretty small. Like there's not a lot of places you can go with that thing.
Yeah, it's still pretty contained, but it's still is fun and controls well. So when it did happen,
Yes,
I was like, oh,
actually,
this is cool.
I was impressed with how well it controlled.
Yeah, it's fun. I just think maybe just because of what they were developing it on and the time constraints and stuff, I almost feel like they could have in a sequel put that cloud in and made bigger areas. And you'll notice that there are ways to upgrade your weapons and stuff. So there's little orbs that you collect.
Yeah.
And I liked, I like finding, it reminds me of like bolts in Ratchet and Clank or like the Lego studs in the Lego games.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of enjoy the process of like clearing out an area, but it's not like you can go off the beaten path a lot and find like cool stuff or upgrades and stuff like that. But I feel like in a sequel, they really could have fleshed out the exploration because it feels good to move. Like Monkey is a fun character to control.
Mm-hmm.
So I do wish that they would have given you a little more freedom to like parkour around the environment and use your cloud. And it's kind of a it's kind of a complaint and a compliment because it feels really good to do. So I wish there was more of it, and they really make a real linear path for you to even climb or explore.
Yeah.
So in the story, we're talking about like background and story. There's a one point where you start seeing these masks around the environment. And whenever Monkey touched the mask, it actually like flashes these like real life photos of this is a random guy.
Yeah. I thought really the first time that happened, it really threw me off guard. I was like, whoa.
Because it's not even a guy in engine. It just like it shows these really blurry photos. Yeah. Of like, it almost seems like vacation photos of this one dude. And so you start doing that, and I mean, what did you think when you first saw that?
I mean, I thought it was very funny the first time I saw it. I just saw this real picture of this guy on my screen all of a sudden. And but once I got past I think once I got past the hysteria of it, I kind of like those little glimpses. I made sure every time I saw one to, because sometimes they'd be to the point where you can see them but you can't get to it yet. I'd always make sure that I can get to them because at the time I didn't know if there was gonna be anything that you get for collecting all of them, but I really don't think there was. But I did enjoy it, seeing all the pictures. You know, there'd be one like on the bridge, and then whenever you go to it, it's like a it's like, oh, when the bridge was in its prime time and there's cars everywhere, and then that's all you get. Like it was very quick. Um, so I mean, I liked them. It just kind of gives you more stuff to collect and discover throughout the game.
Yeah. And it really is the only thing that gives you hints of where the story ends up.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And that will be a complaint later. Is I just think it does a lot of things that this game that games back then did. Is the game will be one thing, and at the very last second, it'll curveball you, and you're like, "Whoa, okay, didn't see that coming," you know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't build up enough. Like the masks are cool, and it gives you glimpses of what's going to happen in the story, but it still doesn't give you enough, you know.
No, it does. And after I finished it, I was curious how I wanted to see like an IGN review video of it, or other other companies. I just wanted to see a couple reviews for it, and I think it was the IGN video. They were talking about the ending, and I think they said something that I agree with. They said, oh, the story was pretty well done, except for the ending. It felt more like a game that ended rather than had a finish. I felt like the story wasn't finished. The game just kind of ended. And I kind of agree with that. It felt really like the last 30 minutes kind of felt weird to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll get to the ending, but those masks are kind of like your only hint towards it. And it just doesn't build enough. Like you were saying about the review, it doesn't give you enough room to like speculate or be surprised, you're just kind of confused.
Yeah. And you know what? Something I think in one of those review videos, I was also looking at the comments, and I saw someone talking about something and they posted it like 2 years ago too, talking about how this game interrupted like the Horizon Zero Dawn release schedule, or what would have been. Because apparently while they were oh gosh, who makes
Gorilla?
Yeah, while Gorilla was working on Killzone 2, I don't know if it was already out or was about to be out. That's when the Horizon Zero Dawn idea got pitched, and everyone in the studio was really, really gung ho about it. And then this game came out, and apparently it was close enough to the concept of Horizon Zero Dawn that they shelved it for like a year or two before actually pitching it to Sony. So I actually kind of wonder how much sooner we would have gotten Horizon if this game didn't come out. And then I saw that video, and someone was like, "There's no way you know that." He's like, "It's in the no clip video for Horizon Zero Dawn, and they talk about it." So I went to go check, and it totally is. Like they were talking, they're like, "Yeah, we were really gung ho about this, so we were all on board." And then we saw the trailer for this game, and then the game came out. We were like, "Hey, we should probably shelf this for a little bit." So then they started working on another game, like a steampunky game, for like a year before ending up just going back to the Horizon idea and pitching it to Sony. So I thought
that's
that was
really wild. It's wild that you say that, because when I was researching the game, because Sony published Heavenly Sword as like one of their launch games, Ninja Theory's last game, and they pitched Enslaved to Sony, and Sony rejected it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So it's just kind of wild that Gorilla did, years later. And there was one point I was playing and I was like, wow, this reminds me a lot of Horizon. Like, the setup and the mechs and all that stuff. So that's wild. That makes sense though.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's pretty telling about the kind of the legacy of this game, that when people saw Horizon, it wasn't just a bunch of people being like, oh, this is a lot like Enslaved, or like Enslaved. It just fallen so far out of like everyone's conscious. Yeah. Whatever I'm trying to say, just out of everyone's mind and out of the talk space there, that just no one even mentioned it until, you play it again. You're like, oh, wow, I guess this is a lot like that, even visually, it looks a lot like Horizon, you know. So maybe you did get the sequel to Enslaved, but where were we? So yeah. They get through the city. They finally get to Tripp's village, and it's pretty well hinted at this point that something bad has happened to Tripp's village, and you're kind of expecting it. Like Monk even says at some point, he's like, "It's not just gonna be us," and that they will be back to that village, you know. So, I mean, were you expecting to go to Tripp's village and actually see like other people in the game?
I mean, not at that point. I was still kind of curious. I was like, are we gonna meet any other characters in this game yet? Because what was that? That was maybe like 3 or 4 hours in, maybe when that happened. Maybe something like maybe not that much. I was still kind of like, I felt like we would have run into somebody like another character, maybe another team member, you know. But once, I mean, yeah, I mean, like you said, they're pretty heavy handed with the fact that hey, there's supposed to be someone at this watch post and no one's here. I'm like, oh, everyone's dead then, right? I mean, that's the only logical conclusion. Like, if
Yeah.
there's supposed to be somebody there, there's nobody there, and then there's also that one part they're crossing the bridge and the bridge just falls apart, and she's like, oh, that bridge is not supposed to, that's supposed to be in good condition. We look after this bridge. And it just falls apart the second Monkey gets on it. I'm like, okay, well, no one's been here for a while then. So if there is anyone left there, I mean, that's probably maybe one or two, maybe,
Or yeah, something happened to damage the bridge and no one fixed it, you know.
Yeah.
Although the section following the bridge sequence is probably my least favorite section in the game. But I think the bridge sequence is one of the best as far as like writing. Because like I said before, like you can see a Monkey's face, he knows something's wrong. And probably has the most writing. The way they wrote Trip is she knows something's wrong and she's kind of just nervous talking. Like she's just nonstop talking. Like you can tell she knows something's wrong, but she doesn't want to admit it.
And
so,
Monkey, he's so quiet. He's like giving her the time to work it out in her mind.
Yeah. And I think one of my favorite lines in the game is the part where she keeps talking about, is it Brian? What's the bridge guy's name? She just keeps talking about this guy who like loves bridges and built all these bridges. And at one point she just like she probably mentions it for like about him and his bridges anymore. So yeah, they get close enough to the village to find it empty. And they go to this watchtower and there's blood everywhere. And at that point, Trip pretty much has a nervous breakdown. And pretty much what happens this entire sequence is Trip kind of has a nervous breakdown. She just runs. She runs towards the village. It's infested with mechs, from when the slavers were last here. And this whole sequence is Trip or Monkey trying to run and catch up with Trip, and they just throw so many mechs at you.
Oh man, yeah.
Like you're like, okay, 2 waves of mechs. That was a lot because we already said the combat isn't like the greatest. You kind of just want to get through it so you can, get on with the game. And there are points where I think they throw like 4 or 5 waves of them at you, and it's not just that it's like the mechanics are clunky or are just boring. It also can be really difficult just because they don't give you a lot of options to deal with crowds.
Yeah, like whenever you have like 5 running at you and 2 of them have shield, so you got to figure out a way to disable the shield, and one of them is trying to shoot you from behind the other 4, and then you got 2 that are just rushing at you, and you have one button to hit them with. I mean, it does not give you a lot of options.
And some of the enemies have like a little icon above them, which means something's wrong with them because Trip hacked Monkey's headband to give him like display statuses on things. And so he can see when like there's a mech that you can do like a finishing move on, and you can throw it at other mechs to explode it, or you can press B over one of these shock mechs that try to shoot electricity at you, and they'll stun all the mechs around it. And later in the game, they throw a lot of enemies at you, but a lot of the mechs have these faults on them. And you can like kind of strategically take those ones first and clear out groups pretty well with that. But I feel like this middle section, they don't give you a lot of those mechs. It's just like waves
like
and
maybe one or
waves.
two.
Yeah. So that really got old by the end of the village sequence.
And the ones that call in reinforcements if you don't kill them fast enough are really annoying too. Then I ended up trying to focus all my strength on them, and me doing that, I would always turn my back to the other ones, and then they'd swarm my back, because I was focusing all my attention on the one trying to call reinforcements. And yeah, that was probably the most frustrating part of the game, is that whole sequence.
Yeah, and probably the most frustrating thing is every time you catch up to Trip, the game would just like do a little cutscene, and she'd run behind another locked door or another wave of like 20 robots would jump down, and you're like, God, it goes on for, what would you say, like 2 hours?
Yeah, it was way longer than I thought it was going to be.
3 hours. It's a pretty long sequence. And they try things like there's a section where they give you just like pretty much unlimited staff ammo. You get shock ammo, and you get these like damage, just ammo that pretty much one hits everything if they don't have a shield. And they kind of make it into like a little third person shooter. And it works for what it is, but it's not necessarily fun. It wasn't made to be that kind of shooter. So they try to break it up with that, but you finally catch up to Trip, and they give you that windmill puzzle, which is weird because there's not like a lot of puzzles in the game. I think there's that theater scene in the first third and the windmill.
Oh yeah, where you're trying to like align the catwalks and stuff.
Yeah, and that stuff's all fine. It's pretty like light puzzle solving. I think it breaks up what you're doing, even if I think the puzzles themselves are a little poorly signposted. Like the windmill one, I kind of looked up a YouTube. I looked up a YouTube video for like one section. I was like, oh, that's what I was supposed to do. Okay, that was not clear.
Yeah, I had that moment too.
Yeah, so I mean, it broke it up all right, but they're not like the best design thing. But finally, you catch up to Trip. You calm her down. You go through like a big boss battle, which again the bosses take like forever. But once you catch up, there is a really good sequence in the game. It's a bad section, but I think the bridge sequence and the sequence where she finds her father dead, but he like left her a message. That sequence where she's just like sees red and is like, I'm gonna, we're gonna destroy the company. I forget what the company's called, but we're gonna destroy it. And that's kind of the point where, Monkey's like, okay, let's do it, because she was supposed to let him go. Like that's all the deal was, like,
just to get her home.
Yeah, just to get her to the village and she'd free him, but she kind of went back on her promise, but he didn't get angry or anything. And so, yeah, they, the story moves forward, and she, she wants to bring the fight to the mechs, to the slavers. And finally, I think Pyramid, is that the name of the?
Oh yeah, Pyramid. Yeah. I couldn't remember until you said that.
Yeah. So yeah, she wants to bring the fight to Pyramid. So at that point, she's on a revenge. It turns into kind of a revenge story at this point. And they go into this kind of it's a cool, I think it's a cool environment, the junkyard. There's this huge like mech graveyard. And they play it in cutscenes, but at some point Monkey gets his bike. And there's cool sequences where they're going through the world, and you see these like huge mechs that are very Horizon-esque. And so it kind of gives you like a glimpse of like, oh, something bad happened. Like there are these huge like dinosaur, animal looking mechs. So you're going to find a friend of Trip's father, and you're going through this kind of mech graveyard. And so it starts out like that. You get his cloud again, and finally you meet the only other character you meet in the game that other than like at the ending, And you meet Pigsy. And this is probably the point of the game that I turned around on the most. Like, everything is sort of how I remembered. I remember like the combat being a little shallow, and when I replayed it, I'm like, okay, yeah, this combat's shallow, like even more shallow than I remember. But Pigsy, I remember thinking back in the day, I was like, oh, that's a funny character,
Yeah.
So
I probably
Pigsy,
would have thought the same thing. Yeah.
yeah, he's such a character at that time. And the way, so Pigsy is just kind of a big walking fat joke, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's kind of the character. And so Pixie, he's kind of he's a mechanic, and he has a gun and a zip line, and that's kind of how he gets around with Monkey and Trip the rest of the game. So you meet Pigsy, and you soon find out that Pigsy has a crush on Trip. And the game even makes it clear at one point that like Trip is like 16. I don't think they ever say her age,
and like,
but I remember that.
yeah, whenever it was so creepy. Whenever they finally met, he was like, "Oh, Trip." He was like, "How's your how's your father?" Because they also make it very clear that he is one of her dad's oldest friends, right?
Right.
Like very, it's such a weird like
he's
hey,
like
I'm your
late
dad's
50s.
friend, but oh yeah, and he's just eyeing her up and down. Oh, it's so weird.
The way they write and direct him, he's such a creep. He's a creep. He's a kind of unfunny. He's a like kind of a gross character to look at. And
which would have been better if if they didn't make him like one of the main people in your group that is now an ally.
Yeah.
Like if he was a creep that all of a sudden you're like, okay, we're leaving, bye. Like they would have made a little more sense. Like, oh, that guy's a creep. We don't want him in our party.
Yeah,
But
and I
they
guess
just kind of go along with it.
And I guess the voice actor did do a good job, like voicing the character, because he sounds gross too. The way he like talks, he's like, oh. He does like,
Yeah, he does.
Like even the way he talks like makes him sound like a creep. Which if that's how he was written, then I guess the voice actor did a good job. But it's creepy. And so what ends up happening here, and you know what, like the idea of it was a good idea. I think at that point in the game, like Trip and Monkey's arc, like the most interesting part of their arc had been kind of completed, where now they trust each other. They're on the same team. They have the same objective. I think the idea of putting a character in that kind of shakes up that dynamic between them is interesting and is like the right way to go, but not like this.
Yeah, it's a good idea on paper, but it's executed, I think.
It's weird because they set up this awful character, and they almost want to make it like a love triangle. Like, Pigsy is competition for Monkey for like Trip.
Yeah,
and
but she makes it very clear that. And then he gets so mad about it. And I thought they were actually going to do something kind of interesting with it.
I know where you're going.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's upset about it, right? And then there's that one cutscene where he's flying the boat or something.
That's such a weird scene.
Yeah. And he looks back at them, and there's like a bunch of rubble in the background, but it makes like a heart for just a second, and it like highlights it in pink. And then he looks back, he's so mad. And then in the next scene, there's the you're trying to get a power cell, and he's like, "Oh, the power cell is right down there." And then Monkey's like really suspicious. He's like, "Right down there. I just go grab that." He said, "Yep." And then you jump down there, obviously with no obvious way up. And then all of a sudden, I think a big fight happens, and then Piggy's like, "Oh, by the way, there's a bunch of mechs down there." And I thought they were gonna do something kind of interesting, like, "Oh, Piggy got rejected, so now he's gonna kind of try to take Monkey out, and they're gonna have to take Piggy out." I feel like that would have been a lot more interesting, but they didn't go that way. And then they just magically forgave him for like trying to throw Monkey into like a death trap, kind of.
Yeah. Like I said, yeah, it's kind of like written off. Like he literally tries to like off Monkey, like pretty much set them up to murder him. And there's that weird sequence where like, you fight the boss in that arena that he gets trapped in, and he like kidnaps Trip. And there's a pretty cool like chase sequence on your hover disc.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Like that's a cool sequence. But once Monkey jumps in and like rescues Trip, you see like Pixie get like super upset about it and
Yeah.
weird, like he's not even sorry. And I almost forget, it was so like poorly done the way they I think like Monkey does confront him, and I think Pixie's just like, oh, I'm sorry, it's just this. And was that the point where like because Trip can hear Monkey through the headband, was that the point where it's like she can hear everything we say? Or that was
Oh, that was
before
so
that, right?
awkward. No,
That was
I think
before.
that was before. Yeah.
Yeah. What I came, and you know what Pigsy feels like? He feels like a character you would like a side character in Borderlands thrown into this like kind
Oh,
of
interesting.
serious game. And he just is just like he's written like a cartoon character in a pretty serious like in like a pretty
Yeah.
serious game thematically, and the
Yeah,
way
he
like
sticks out
Trip,
like a sore thumb in
yeah,
the
it's
game.
almost like he doesn't belong in the game. And they could have wrote him to be like, sure, like the comedic, um having someone has some comedic breakup and stuff. That stuff works pretty well. Like you have like Gimli in Lord of the Rings, and Marvel movies do it all the time with like certain characters. But the way
If
they did it is just
if they went the Last of Us route, I think it would have been perfect. Have like a character like Bill, a really grouchy old guy that they come to for help, and he's like begrudgingly helping them, but he has a history with one of them, so he's helping them, but he's very like pessimistic and negative. I feel like that's kind of the route that they should have taken. It would have made more
yeah.
sense, I think.
Yeah, he's just like a really gross creep. Is what we're getting to. He's just like not a good character. And back in the day, I just kind of took it as is. I was just like, oh, like that's kind of a funny character. I forget
And,
exactly what I thought about Pixie, but I don't remember him being like a terrible character.
yeah, and and it's probably a lot of I think it's a problem that a lot of people had back then because the 3 or 4 video reviews I saw, I don't think anybody like mentioned how gross that character was,
Yeah, I feel
which is
like
weird.
if this game
You
was
think
been
more
revisited,
people.
oh yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I feel like more people, if there were people would replay it now, I think Pigsy would be a big like, man, that character. I don't even think we haven't even talked about the worst scene. Those are the scenes I want to talk about. Like, there's a decent scene where like at first when they're racing, like I think that race to the top where Monkey's racing Pigsy to the top, like that's kind of like a decent little sequence.
That's the most interesting thing I think that happened with Pixie.
Yeah, you're like, oh, like the character has like some cool, interesting tool sets. Mechanically, when you fight, he now like, he jumps on, he finds like a platform and will shoot dudes for you, which is helpful in combat, and that kind of breaks up combat in a nice way. And that's like the nice thing I say about Pigsy. But you did cover it. That awkward scene where he's like professing like his love for Trip to Monkey in like a really creepy way, and she can overhear him. And
Then
then
the camera pans over to Trip, and she's like kind of giving them the side eye, like pretending that she's not hearing. It was they
yeah,
made a good
and
job, or they did a good job making that feel awkward because it very much was.
yeah, if that's what they were going for, then yes. And then yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the boat scene because it's just so dumb.
Oh wait, I laughed so hard at that freaking part. Oh
it's
man,
it's just so out of it's just so out of left field for like the tone the game was taking. Like that whole village
yeah.
sequence and her deciding to take the fight to Pyramid and everyone she knows dying to like this. It's like, what is going on? Did they feel like it was too serious and they needed to, I don't know who thought Pixie was a good idea, but he does feel like a character of that era. Like
Yeah.
I don't remember anyone playing like Borderlands 1 and 2 and being like, these characters are kind of annoying. you know, Not all of them, but some of them, and it's just I think it's just like a very much a character of era. And we didn't even get to the worst scene with Pigsy. There's one more scene I'd like to talk about, but they try to make his arc be that like, at first he's just like jealous of Trip and Monkey and their like budding relationship or whatever. Or their deepening relationship, and they want to make him like a villain and then him, be supportive and then him doing like that heroic sacrifice at the end, which just doesn't hit hard considering the character.
No.
I was like, all right, good riddance.
Yep.
But so they meet. What are they trying to do again? I think they're trying to get power cores because Pixie knows of this like gigantic underwater mech. It's supposed to be the mech that's gonna like give Pyramid absolute control.
Mhm.
And it's just huge, walking, like four-legged. I'm trying to remember what kind of animal it's after. It's just a big, giant, four-legged mech.
Yeah, the Leviathan or something. I can't remember what animal it was either.
Was it like it wasn't like an elephant, but that's kind of the idea. The Leviathan. And so the rest of the game is them getting things they need to get into the Leviathan. Right. You're going through the junkyard to fix Pixie's like bus, which can fly. And so you're doing that. Like I said, all those weird scenes happen. The gameplay at this point is okay. It's back to kind of what the first third of the game was, where you're doing a lot of like stealth. There's less fighting. I think some of the arenas were a little more annoying, just because there's like instant fail. There's these mines you can run into that just instantly kill you.
Yeah. Oh God, the mines. And in some of the mines, you have that visible red ring around, like, hey, don't walk in this ring or you die.
Yeah.
And I can tell you how many times I died when I must have been 2 or 3 feet away from the ring, and it would somehow trigger the mine and be instant death. And that, man, I hated those mines.
I did too. I felt like in the first part of the game when they used them, they gave you a decent path, and I actually liked them because you can use the crowd control ability that knocks the mechs back, and you can actually like knock them into the mines.
I do remember doing that a little bit.
I was like, oh, that's cool. And this sequence are just scattered in weird ways, and they give you such tight windows to walk through. And Monkey's fun to control, but he's not like so
he's not very
controllable.
Precise, though.
Yeah, like you touch the button and he's going,
Yeah.
It's like trying to be, it's like in like a 3D Sonic game trying to get Sonic to do something slowly. It does not work. But they're hiding all the little upgrade orbs, so of course you're going to go for them, but you just end up dying and the checkpointing sucks. So that's like the frustration in that area, but there's some decent like platforming, and I enjoyed that section way more than the village one. And then you get you get into the air. They're heading towards Pyramid, and at some point, one of the operators, one of the slavers, is asking, like, what's your code? What's your landing code? And they're trying to come up with excuses, and they don't get it, and they get shot down. And this is the other Pigsy part. Do you remember this?
I'm having trouble remembering. Maybe I blocked it out of my memory.
He probably did, when they're in the escape pod and they have to all cram in together.
Oh my God. God
you were.
Yeah.
It's such a weird sequence. Like, it's supposed to be like.
What did he say? He was like, hey, Monkey, can you move your right hand? Monkey's like, no, I don't have room. And then there was no reason they had to put this in there, but they just had to continue making his character gross.
Yeah.
Like, just a nasty character. Like, no one wants to talk to this guy. And he's like, because your hand is on my penis. Like, what the heck? What is this game? I don't understand.
What is this character? Yeah, they crammed in. So it's like a little slapstick moment. Like, everyone shoved in. Fine, sure. And then, he's just like, hey, your hand, could you move it? No. Well, you're touching my penis. And then it like zooms out, and Monkey apparently, like, he screams, like Monkey like squeezes or something.
Yeah.
And then it's just on to the next sequence. Like, it fades to black and they're out, and you're just like, what? It's so weird because the writing is so consistent. Like, like I could use more of it, but it's at least consistent up to this point. And then that character comes on, and you're like, who wrote this part? It's like it's like at the last moment they had to throw in a character, and they're like, one of their interns had to write Pigsy,
Yeah.
And they threw him in. It's just so weird. He's just such a weird character. And the problem is, like, yes, Trip and Monkey did need another character to work on. There's such a good opportunity to throw in like something that really changed the dynamic, or you know, made Trip like kind of have to make like a harder decision, like, should I do this? Is this right? You know, is it right for me to bring Monkey with me, you know, to do the suicide mission? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they don't explore any of that, you know. But at this point, you're in this is probably the second worst part of the game, is going through the Leviathan.
Yeah.
The platforming is good up to this point, so the platforming is not the problem. But they give you these kind of climbing puzzles, and the climbing puzzles are okay. But if you mess up, the checkpointing's so brutal that you can lose like 20 minutes of progress.
Yeah, and whenever you do that a couple times, you've lost an hour and a half. You know.
Oh, no. So even before you get into the climbing puzzle, there's a point where they steal a sub to get into the Leviathan after they get shot down.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that whole point where you're trying to get... Oh, no. You're going to this base once you shot down to get a sub to get into the Leviathan. And like Pigsy gets stuck. Like he gets stuck in his cord, and you have to protect the... the sub. And it's like a really long sequence. Like it's way longer than it needs to be. And so there's that. And once you get the sub, you get into the Leviathan, and you're supposed to there's these 4 clasps that are stopping it from moving. And what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to blow it up and free its legs so it can, like, you know, swim out of the water. So it's a really long sequence in the game of climbing, and it's okay, except for the part where it was the point where I ran into my first glitch, like really bad glitch. And that was, I had just released the first leg, and the first leg is like the longest point of the game, of that section.
Yeah.
I was a little nervous when I got the first leg, and they're like 3 more. And I'm like, 3
No,
more?
yeah, me too. I was like, 3 more of those? Are you freaking kidding me? I can't do that. I have a job I have to get to tomorrow.
Yeah. And thankfully the second is like a little longer. And then the third and fourth, you just are like right next to each other.
Really short.
Yeah. But unfortunately, right after I blew off that first clasp, it glitched, and I had to restart to the point where they walk into like the sub, or walk into the Leviathan.
Oh no.
And I was like, oh, you do all that platforming again. But there's the platforming section. Finally, they free it. And so, you get all 4, you take control. Like the village, there's this one scene where you're supposed to protect this, like you're trying to get the engine online, and there's these 4 like cooling cores you have to protect, and they throw so many mechs at you. Yeah, it's not a hard sequence, because at least the mechs aren't like aggroed on you. They're trying to get the these like cooling tubes. Yeah. But again, it's just like way longer than it should be. That's probably like a 30-minute sequence of you just like spamming square and triangle, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So once you get that done, you go through, you finally get the Leviathan, and this kind of brings you to like the end sequence. Before we continue, what did you think of that section? I think we kind of agree.
No, I mean, I think everything you said I agree with. Like, it was all a lot longer than it needed to be. That last part of that section where you to defend those 4 stations, I was really like fighting to get through it. You know, I was just kind of so bored with that section, and I was ready to move on. But I mean, whatever. I mean, there were other parts of the game that I liked. You know, I did want to finish it. I wanted to see, if Pixie dies in the end. I was really looking forward to that. You know, so I really, that's what really was pushing me forward.
You're like, please don't make me listen to this character anymore.
When he offered himself to like sacrifice himself towards the end, I was like, oh, great idea. That is the best idea you've ever had, Pixie.
Amazing. Why couldn't you have done this within the first 15 minutes of your existence? You do that, and then they're setting up this big sequence for the end where you are now in control of this like super mech, and you're it's been walking for a while. You're in this big desert, and they're called the company pyramid that's like capturing everyone, and the slave traders, are all part of pyramid, and literally you're walking up to this giant pyramid.
Yeah, I
Which
didn't
is a
think they
little
were
on
going
the
to be
nose.
so. Yeah, I did not think they were going to be so on the nose as that, but they were.
So yeah, you have this giant like tank mech, and Pigsy's controlling it, and they're doing their last cutscene where they're getting ready for like pretty much the final fight, and it's pretty clear like this is the big fight. I think at this point it seems a little rushed. You're just like, whoa, like we were just like, I don't know anything about this company. We're like at their final base. You know what I mean? It's kind of
Yeah.
weird.
It's kind of, it's
But
like what I said earlier. Like, I really wish, like, as the game went on and on, I wished more and more. Like, I would really like to know more about this company, about what happened. And then when we got to that part, I thought to myself, I was like, are we really about to just like do the last mission of the game? And I still have no idea what the heck went on, like in this world.
Right. Yeah. But there is a scene before the final sequence where I think Trip like sits down with Monkey and she deactivates the headband. And so it was her saying like, hey, like, I'm sorry, I broke our deal. Like, here you go. You're free to go, or, do what you want. And he tells her, I don't know. I didn't know what to think of this scene, but he tells her to put it back on. He's like, no.
I thought that was weird. I felt like, I don't know. I kind of felt like that maybe they needed it though, because they used it as an excuse early on where they were like, oh, hey, if we're far apart, we can hear each other and you can see, you. I think that's when they unlocked the HUD or something. He was like, what am I seeing? And she's like, oh, you'll be able to see it. So they kind of needed him to keep it on. But I feel like it just made that scene kind of awkward though.
Yeah, it makes the kind of writing inconsistent, but I thought it the same thing. I was like, oh, but he still needs to see like enemy health bars and like notifications. I thought that was actually a cool way of explaining that. The HUD.
Yeah, earlier on in the game. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I thought that was neat because there wasn't a HUD, like a big HUD at first, and then you got that and you're like, oh, wow, cool. Or there might have been like a HUD showing how many like upgrade points you got. But just as far as like the game's budget too, we didn't even mention this, but like the upgrade hub is super simple looking. It looks like they mocked up. They did like a mock up for what like a menu would be for the upgrade system, and then they just like didn't have time to replace it. So it's just like weirdly like very stark, but not a big deal. But it's something you just look at and be like, I can see maybe where they cut corners.
Yeah, the menu. It was very PS2-y to me, kind of like that era. Not so PS3 era.
Yeah. That's where I think the budget of the game, or maybe even the time they had to develop it, you can kind of see it. But yeah, now we are like at the end of the game, and they have that sequence. So I think it was a necessary sequence for Trip and Monkey. So I'm not saying they shouldn't have done it. It was just, he puts the headband back on, says, no, we're going to do this. I'm going to, finish this out with you. And then as they're approaching the base, a bunch of these like scorpion mechs, or a big scorpion mech comes out of the ground. It's a cool design though. And Pigsy like shoots it with this huge like mega cannon, right?
Mm-hmm.
He does that, and then they're like, yeah, we did it, and then I think like 6, 7 come out of the ground. And they're like, no. So they're able to still take out all but one, and that kind of while this is all happening, it's a cool idea. I think it's a cooler idea on paper than it ended up being in practice. That you're kind of like climbing around this mech, like while Pigsy is shooting these giant scorpions. But I just don't think they were up to the task to make it look as cinematic as it should. It doesn't feel as cinematic as it should be.
No, it didn't.
Because the idea is really cool. It kind of reminded me of like the God of War 3 intro, where like like it doesn't do.
Oh,
what
you're
that
like,
does.
okay.
where all the Titans are climbing around you, and
Yeah.
it zooms out. I think it wanted to do that. It just didn't have the chops or the budget or the time. Probably all three, to
Yeah.
to make a sequence like that. But for what it is, it works. It is like the second set piece,
Yeah.
sequence. Although I would maybe include that chase sequence where you're saving Trip to be maybe the second one. And that's a cool sequence too. But yeah, so there's these big leeches that are taking power, and you're like shooting them off. And so you're doing that for a while. You're fighting mechs that are boarding. And then there's this really long boss battle with that scorpion mech, which again, it's a cool sequence. Like they're able to shoot all but one, and then finally it like climbs the top of the Leviathan and rips off the cannon, and you're fighting this mech. This big old scorpion mech on top of yours, and it's a cool sequence.
Yeah.
It just, again, I just feel like it's just way too long.
Yeah. If the checkpointing was a lot better, I wouldn't have hated it so much. Because like I said earlier, I think what do you do? Like you have to fight a wave of robots, and then you have to go over to this area to shoot the vents or something.
Yep. Yeah, you have to climb
and then you have to climb the tower to shoot it up. You have to get high enough to shoot the weak points, and then you have to do it again on the left side after. And there's like a wave of robots in between every step. And I got to the last step, and a glitch happened, and my guy was stuck in the ground. I couldn't move.
No.
Yeah, so and there was no checkpoint in this entire boss fight, so I had to do the whole thing over again. And I knew how close I was to the end of the game, so I was like, I'm just gonna push through and do that whole 30-minute fight again.
Yeah. I think I died. I think I just straight up ate it at one point. You know what it is? You're supposed to, like, you shoot his arms, and then he shoots that big cannon on his tail at you. And I didn't realize I didn't realize it wanted me to run away in time. And he just like shot me off, and then he was like, "Oh!" And then it started towards the beginning. I was like, "Oh no!" But yeah, finally you shoot that, and then you shoot his tail. You get you get the angle to shoot his tail, and then the last section, I forget what you have to shoot exactly, but you have to shoot and fight off mechs kind of at the same time.
Yeah,
which again we said that's not the game's strong suit, like big groups.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so it's like I said, the entire sequence is a really cool idea. Like the scale and everything, like fighting on top of your mech, this big scorpion boss. With more time, money, probably just more time and money, it probably could have actually turned out to be a really cool sequence and some editing. But finally, you beat the boss. They're finally to Pyramid, and no. I think more like mechs come out of the ground after you destroy it, and like, okay, there's no chance. And I think Pigsy offers to sacrifice himself,
and that's when we all applaud.
Yeah. Yes.
Get happy.
Thank you. Please. But Trip's like, oh, I won't leave him behind. Like I said, it's just like I'm just like whatever.
Yeah.
And so Monkey does the right thing, grabs her, they jump off, and the whole mech like self-destructs, killing the last like line of defense for Pyramid. And then this is going to be a little hard one to explain. I was thinking of just reading a synopsis for the ending, but I'm like, I'll try to explain it as best as I could understand it. So yeah, like we said before, once Monkey started seeing these visions once he had the headset on, and they thought it was just like a side effect and he was hallucinating. But about halfway through the game, Monkey's like, I'm not hallucinating. I'm seeing this guy's memories, or you know what I mean, like how he lived. And once they get into Pyramid, it's just like it's this one guy in the center, and he has like a bunch of tubes coming out of his back. Like he looks kind of just like a corpse.
Yeah,
with tubes.
He's going crazy on that keyboard, thoh.
I think I actually like the animation.
No, yeah, I do too. It's kind of creepy.
It's real creepy looking. It's cool. Yeah. Yeah, he kind of moves like I don't even know how to explain it. Kind of like a spider would, or something.
Yeah,
but
spider.
yeah,
that's a good way to. He looked like a spider.
It's just like very inhuman and jerky. But yeah, he's like at this huge control center. There's tubes. And there are, what's supposed to be like the entire pyramid is filled with just like people with these headsets on standing in rows, and they all look like they're hallucinating, and finally, they're like, what do we do? What is it? And I think, what does Trip want to do? Trip just wants to kill the dude. And I
Yeah.
think Monkey's like, wait, like, I want to know what's going on, And so I think she disconnects the headset and connects it to what everyone else is seeing. And pretty much it's the Matrix. Like what Pyramid did was, I'm trying to remember. Do you remember if the mechs happened first and then he saved humanity by just like giving them like bliss, like through the headset?
I really can't remember. I kind of
I
thought
said it is not explained well.
I think that last bit with the guy kind of talking to them, what happened, I thought it was very jumbled. Sorry, it was very jumbled and it was kind of hard to understand,
Yeah.
Very
But pretty much
done.
he made them like a paradise. Like the slavers have been collecting humans. And something we didn't explain that was explained in that fish tank scene is, Monkey says every time like you get a leader, a leader that like builds a society and does well, and it gets the attention of the slavers, and it's gone. So he's implying that this has happened many times before, where you get like a really charismatic leader and they start rebuilding, and then the slave ships come in,
Yeah.
But apparently he's been taking people, pretty much putting them into the Matrix using these visors and giving them like an actual like unrealistic paradise in their heads.
And they're like his memories, right? Didn't he say that? He's like, I am, like, I don't remember if he gave him a name, but he was like, they're all living the memories of this one guy, and he's like, and that's, they're living my memories, stuff like that.
They're like living his best memories. And that's like the things like Monkey was seeing through the visions. Like I said, it almost looked like a vacation slideshow. Yeah. Oh, that first one is amazing though. It's just this grody looking like a JPEG of this dude. But and so and you can see that Monkey starts like smiling for like has this like real blissful smile, and senses something's wrong and like disconnects him. And at a certain point, he's I forget how the events turned down, but he's like, explains her what's going on in there. He's like, it's beautiful,
Yeah.
Which is kind of a cool sequence on his part. But at
I don't
some
know.
point,
I kind of felt it was out of character that he was like, let me try to put this on, that, this, like, after having the whole game with this slave band on my head, he's like, oh, let me put this one on. Like, I felt like it was really like that. It's very careless, I think.
Yeah. Does he like ask her to pull him out if things go wrong?
No, he just like, here, let me put. He just puts it on, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, I'm in paradise right now.
So the way I took that is just like, I have to know, like, I've seen these memories,
Yeah.
But she
doesn't even pull him out. She just goes to kill the guy, and that's what disrupts everything.
See, how I got that is she saw that he was like fading, that he might not come back, and I got it. That my impression was that to like get him out, she just starts like ripping that dude apart, the tubes out of his back.
Oh, yeah, I mean that's probably what they were going for, to be honest.
Yeah, probably both. Like, she's getting her revenge, and also she's kind of like saving Monkey from like the lie or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I said, they brushed past it. It would have been cool to have a conversation between them. The two saying like, "Do we want to do this?" I think they do. Like, that's the question posed. That he posed to them is like, "Would you take that away from them? Like, this world is just death and mechs." There's nothing out there, but in here, they're happy. So he poses the question, and Monkey starts getting drawn in, and Trips just decides like, screw it, screw him. I'm getting him out of here and like ending this. And I like I said, I like the animations of the operator. because she starts like ripping it out and he starts freaking out even more.
Yeah, he's like twice as fast now with everything he's doing.
Yeah. So and then the it starts pulling out and you see everyone like all the lines like it's supposed to give you the impression that there's like millions of people in there. They all start like start losing their reality and coming to the actual reality, and they all just start screaming, which is kind of, like I said, there's some cool stuff happening here. It's just poorly done within the game. It doesn't prepare you for it. I feel like I'm gonna be like armchair writer, but I feel like if they would have found someone in that state and like halfway through the game and Monkey saw what was going on, that they knew what they were going to end, that would have been better rather than just Trip saying, I'm going to kill them,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it just comes on real suddenly. It actually reminds me of like Assassin's Creed 2. Remember that Assassin's Creed 2? Where you fist fight the Pope. And then there's just that sequence where she says, it's a cool sequence where she, what's the main character's name? Assassin's Creed 2. Desmond. She doesn't say Ezio. She like the angel lady is speaking to Desmond through it.
Yeah, I remember really liking that.
And then he wakes up like that. I feel like they were trying to like copy that sort of like WTF moment,
Mm-hmm.
They just don't quite nail it, and it's just kind of confusing. Even though there's like cool visual stuff to it, and then the game ends. It just ends.
Yeah, it's so abruptly. Like you don't get any. Like I said earlier, I feel like it doesn't. You don't get a finished story. It gets interrupted by the game ending.
And it makes me think what a sequel would have been, because they were planning a sequel.
Yeah.
And I have to think maybe some of that is that they thought they were going to make another game and didn't. But yeah, the game ends, and the piece of DLC, the chance they would have had to actually like give you some closure and stuff. Instead, if it's a DLC primarily focusing on playing as Pigsy.
The worst thing they could have done.
And what I was kind of excited. Sorry.
I remember you texted us in the Discord saying, "Hey, I just finished the game. I'm gonna start the DLC," and then I think like the very next day, you're like, we're not gonna play through this. Like, we don't have to talk about this on the podcast. I really don't like Piggy, and I remember, I wanted to try it myself, and I mean, within like the first 5 minutes, they basically revealed, hey, this whole DLC is about him trying to build himself a robot sex slave.
Yeah, like a waifu, like a robot.
Yeah,
waifu.
I was like, what are they doing? Oh man, I couldn't believe it.
It's perfect for that character, but I don't want any part of it. And even I did get like an hour into it at, it's like a third person shooter at points. You do get a zip line. That's the thing. It's actually kind of fun to play because you get like a grapple hook like you would in Ratchet and Clank. It becomes more of like a little third person shooter, and you get a bunch of tools for stealth that can like distract and shock and like,
really?
It seems like a cool, like mechanically, it gives you a lot of options. It's more of like a stealth game, which I think was kind of maybe the more fun parts of the original Enslaved, I think they realized. But yeah, I want nothing to do with Pigsy. And I mean, I will give it one more thing is I think this is just an accident, but we were talking before that a lot of the cutscenes, I was playing on PC, so like 1080p, the original game was probably like 720 or less. So I was able to play it on like all the settings cranked up 1080p on a decent tower, and it ran like at 60 flawlessly. And so whenever the pre-rendered cutscenes came up, which would have been like 360 PS3 quality, like resolution wise, it's just really grainy bad video. Instead of doing that in the Pigsy DLC, they had like kind of a stylized art thing going.
Oh,
like a comic book look.
Yeah, because I did play the beginning.
I was like, wow, these aged a lot better.
Yeah.
Those
they look good.
So that was like the nicest thing I could say about it is like, oh, I think they figured out like what made their original game good, and it looks like they came up with like some interesting like mechanics within the world. But yeah, Pigsy, man. What a way to go. That was not the way to go.
No, it wasn't.
But yeah, and I guess we didn't talk about the visuals as much, but it's not much. Like it looks like a game of its time. It's just had a lot of color, which was impressive back in the day. But I mean, we did mention like the animation holds up surprisingly well for like character faces.
Yeah,
which makes sense. But some of the animations and like the cut scenes are a little clunky, which is all expected. They weren't.
I did like the little in combat, like whenever you'd finish a wave.
Oh yeah,
I liked those. Those are really good little. I don't know what you call those. Like
they were like slow motion finishing moves, like monkey guys.
Yeah. It was like very cinematic, cool. Yeah. I really liked that. That was my favorite part of the combat was finishing the wave and seeing a really cool like cinematic finish move on the last robot.
Are you saying the point where you don't have to do the combat anymore is the favorite part of the combat? But yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. I agree. And I think that it's a cool end to like the boss fights and stuff like that. With their second like cutscene pace where he finally catches up to that robot as Trip and he like throws the staff into it in slow motion.
Oh yeah, that was cool
over
too.
And stuff.
Yeah,
like there's cool stuff.
Yeah, they did those really well throughout the game.
Yeah, those are really neat. I wish there was like more of that stuff within the combat. Speaking of Horizon, that's what I remember of the Horizon 2 reveal with the combat was that they did those really cool like zoom in finisher moves in Horizon 2 with like the combat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, I was like, hey, that reminds me of that. Look at that. It comes back to Horizon again.
It sure does.
But yeah, but like I feel bad because this was a game when I was picking out the game, I was like, okay, what's a game that I know like not a lot of people maybe played that might be interesting to talk about that I know is at least like a good game that I enjoyed, Yeah. And I was like, Enslaved, I've heard people mention it. Like I've been listening to a couple podcasts, people mention Enslaved. They probably haven't played it in a good decade too. So I was like, that'd be a good one to come back to. I think that's like a really fun game from that era. And I think it was interesting going back to a game. Like you don't think of a PS3 360 game as being old, but at this point it kind of is, Yeah,
over 10 years old, so.
Totally, yeah. And it does show you how far games have come. But I mean, what's your like overall impression?
I liked it. I mean, towards the end, I think I had slightly more negative feelings about it than I do now. I have time to kind of think about the entire experience, and I liked it. If would I recommend it to someone? I feel like I really don't know.
I mean, at this point, there's so many games that have done this thing now and done so much better.
Like if someone specifically wanted to play a game from that era that is good, I'd probably recommend it, but I would not recommend. I don't think I'd recommend someone to go out of their way to play this, if they have all these other games that they haven't played.
Yeah. I think there's.
But
better
I did like it. I liked it more than I thought. More than I thought I would. So that's a plus.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, as a game I played in the era, in that context, like, like I said, it would have been like me playing Guardians of the Galaxy now. I'm like, wow, that was a really good game. It was well paced. It was well written. I enjoyed that, Like I walked away like real satisfied, but coming back to it, you can just see like, well, especially in like a critical context, like we knew we were going to talk about it. But even playing now, it makes sense. Like I've always thought like, why haven't they remastered this? Like it's not full on cult classic status, but enough people didn't play it and it's considered a good game that I'm surprised like a remaster, hadn't happened. But after playing through and like seeing all the Pigsy stuff, like as a studio, I'd be like, I'd rather have people have the rose tinted glasses on this one.
Yeah, it makes sense that they probably just don't touch it.
Yeah, but I do appreciate like playing like a piece of video game history that I know a lot of people, like a good amount of people don't have a history with or have their hands on, I think that in itself to me is always kind of informative and cool. But yeah, I mean, what would you, if you had to give it just like a off the cuff, like 0 out of 10 rating, what do you think you'd give it?
I'd probably give it a 7, I think.
Okay. Yeah. That's fair. Back in the day, I probably walked away from that and was like, that's a solid 8.5. You know, if like Uncharted 2 is like a 10 to me, that's like an 8.5. And that makes sense, like in the context of back then. Now, I mean, that's the thing. We'd have to rate it. We're rating it in like 2022 terms, which isn't kind of fair to the game. But you know, if this game came out now, I think it being generous, I'd probably give it like a 6.5. In reality, this game probably would have been like, you know, if it was reviewed on today's standards by people, you know, it'd probably be like a 4 or 4.5. You know what I mean? Just kind of with all the issues. But I think it's valuable to, you know, we're not talking about it in a bubble. Like I'm more generous to it. I could even giving it like a 6.5 to like a 7, just knowing the era it came from. But I think we talked about the music because, okay, for this podcast, you know, we won't have a middle piece to this, but I have to find a few interesting pieces of music from games we talk about for just like a good, you know, for good bumpers. And I'm like, I'm really going to have to like go back and type in like Enslaved OST and figure out what, like, when in my head, I'm just thinking of the, every time I try to think of it, I just think of the Horizon like main theme. I'm like, that's not Enslaved, you know, you know, or whatever. I was just like, there must have been a decent piece of music. I think maybe there's like a piece of music when you first get your cloud that is kind of stringy and adventurous sounding. You know, like I said, it's so forgettable, dude.
Yeah, you could play me any generic, you know, soundtrack, and I'd probably be like, oh yeah, that could have been in the game. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad I didn't give you a game that was like super long and that you just like straight up weren't enjoying, you know. I mean, personally, I like taking a game. I think me playing it back in the day and you playing it for the first time actually kind of gave it a good dynamic for what we were going to do, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we've pretty much covered everything. I don't know if there's that much more to say, you know? Any closing, I mean, I'm pretty sure you had your closing thoughts there, but yeah, that was our Enslaved Odyssey to the West playthrough. I mean, if anyone wants to, you know, if you're interested after all that, like you said, there are really good things in this game. I think you could watch you could pretty much be fine watching maybe like a retrospective online or, you know, or maybe like modern impression video. I don't even know if that's out there right now. And you could probably get the sense of what this game is and get a good idea. But it is the complete edition on PC is $20. And I believe just the standard edition, which just doesn't include the Pigsy stuff, which is A-OK, is like $15 on Xbox with the backwards compatibility. So those are 2 decent ways to come back and play the game. So they're decently, it's doable. You don't have to emulate or anything. But I think that's our episode for today. So thank you guys for joining us on this kind of slimmed down podcast. But Colton, I just want to thank you for taking the time to play through the game and join me today.
For sure.
And we will be back in a couple of weeks. And I have some cool ideas on how to cover our E3. That's kind of a little non-traditional and should be pretty fun. If I want to do what I want to do, it's going to be a lot of work to edit, but I am A-OK with that as long as we do something fun and cool. So if you're listening to this, hopefully you're having a good summer announced game period. And if you're listening to this a little later, hopefully there's some more cool stuff. I know, like I said, there's like a Nintendo thing possibly later this month, but without spoiling things, like the Xbox conference was really good, really solid. So yeah, well, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.